Hey guys, welcome to Arcran's Arcanum. I'm Arcran, and this is the start of a new series where I'm going to be going over how to run the game for different classes. As a DM, knowing the different strengths and weaknesses of the classes in your party can be a very valuable tool. It'll make it much easier to build balanced encounters, as well as informing you on what can be a really difficult challenge for your party, as well as knowing what can give one player the opportunity to show off. Your players will appreciate this effort and it'll make your game a lot more fun. With why we care about this out of the way, let's move on to how to run the game for a rogue. The first and probably best known ability of a rogue that you should be mindful of when running the game is Sneak Attack. Sneak Attack is how the rogue deals most of their damage. Instead of getting extra attacks or spells that deal damage, they get Sneak Attack, and that makes a single attack per turn do a lot more damage. Triggering their Sneak Attack is really easy. If you have advantage on the attack, it's a Sneak Attack. Otherwise, as long as you don't have disadvantage, you trigger Sneak Attack when attacking an enemy next to one of your allies. Some of the subclasses, like Swashbuckler, even give more ways to trigger Sneak Attack. With how easy it is to trigger Sneak Attack, you should generally expect that whenever your rogue attacks, it's going to be a Sneak Attack. A lot of new DMs get scared by the big damage numbers that you see with Sneak Attacks and try to nerf the ability in some way. Please don't do this. Sneak Attack is the only way that rogues are able to keep up with the other classes in terms of damage, and while it looks scarier because it's all from a single hit, it is balanced against the damage that all the other classes put out. Something to keep in mind is that Sneak Attack is once per turn, not once per round. This means that if for whatever reason your rogue is able to make an attack on another creature's turn, they can use their Sneak Attack again, potentially getting several Sneak Attacks in the same round. Because of this, be a little bit wary of having monsters run away from your rogue because that opportunity attack is probably going to hurt. The next ability that's really core to how rogues work is their Cunning action, which they get at level 2. This ability lets them use their bonus action to dash, disengage, or hide. With dash and disengage, those are pretty simple. They either let them move more or let them move without provoking opportunity attacks, which your rogue will probably make use of a lot to just get around the battlefield more effectively. Because Cunning action is a bonus action, we know it's meant to be used in combat. Unfortunately, the rules for hiding are left almost entirely up to the DM, which makes them a little bit vague. To give you a more concrete way to run this, I'm going to tell you how I run it at my table. In order to take the hide action in combat, you need to be behind at least 3/4 cover, and that cover needs to be between you and whatever you're trying to hide from. Once that happens, you can take the hide action, make a stealth check, and if you roll above the passive perception of your enemies, you are now hidden. After a successful hide action, a target becomes unseen, which fortunately does have well-defined rules. Attacks against an unseen target have disadvantage, attacks by an unseen target have advantage, and in addition, a lot of spells specify a target you can see, and no one can see you anymore, so you can't be targeted by those. Now, just because your rogue is hidden doesn't mean that enemies don't know where they are. If your rogue had to run behind a tree before hiding, the enemies probably still know they're behind the tree, they just can't see them at the moment. The rogue continues to be hidden until either they cast a spell or make an attack, they leave the cover, an enemy takes the search action and rolls higher than the rogue's stealth check, or just if an enemy gets a direct line of sight to the rogue. If there's no cover between an enemy and the rogue, they're not hidden from them, they can just be seen. Finally, rogues are defined by their skills. They get the most skill proficiencies out of any class and have access to expertise, which lets them double their proficiency for a handful of skills. Because of this, your rogue is going to probably have access to more skills than the rest of your party, and their modifiers are going to be much higher. We'll talk about how you can use this to build interesting encounters and work it into your campaign later in the video. And with that, you should have a good understanding of the core mechanics behind a rogue in 5th edition. Now let's move on to how we can build interesting encounters for our rogues, starting with combat. In general, rogues are a bit squishier than the other classes. They only have a d8 hit dice, which, while not the worst, isn't great, and they only have access to light armor without shields. This means they're generally going to have a lower AC and lower hit points. Fortunately, rogues can use their Cunning action to kind of get around the battlefield and try to stay away from enemies, but in a small enough arena, they're going to struggle with this, so close quarters combat with cramped spaces can be very difficult for your rogue. Fortunately, rogues do get 2 useful defensive abilities later on. Uncanny Dodge is the first, which, after being hit by an attack, a rogue can use their reaction to halve the damage. There's 2 quick notes for this ability. One, it does specify attacks, so if you're not making an attack roll, they can't use it. It doesn't work against saving throw abilities, so most spells are unaffected by Uncanny Dodge. In addition, it does take the rogue's reaction, so they can only do it once per round, so once they are up against a lot of targets, it becomes less useful. The other ability is Evasion, which means when your rogue succeeds on a dexterity saving throw, they take no damage, and even if they fail, they only take half damage. This will make your rogue extremely resistant to dexterity saving throws, and you can generally expect that they will be completely unaffected by them. When you're building encounters, I encourage you to continue to use dexterity saving throws, whether it's through an environmental effect or spells like Fireball. The rest of the party that probably doesn't have evasion, so it'll still work against them, and your rogue gets to show off and occasionally take no damage from something scary like Disintegrate or a Fireball. In terms of damage, your rogue is going to rely almost entirely on their sneak attack, which will make them good against single targets, but they're going to struggle against groups. One big hit is great when you're fighting a 60 hit point ogre, but is not very helpful against a 7 hit point goblin. Because of this, try to make sure that your encounters include at least a few larger targets so that your rogue has something they can attack and feel useful. On the other hand, if you want to make a challenging encounter for a rogue, a lot of small guys is almost impossible for them to deal with. Because your rogue can dash and disengage as a bonus action, they can get around the battlefield better than pretty much any other class. Because of this, you want to make sure that your battlefields are interesting, and that there's points on the battlefield that your rogue will want to go to. Whether it's a particularly good piece of cover, things on the battlefield that it can interact with and change the course of the battlefield, or just a really safe location, try to build things in that the rogue will want to interact with and can use their mobility to get to and show off a little bit. When coming up with interesting locations on the battlefield, make sure that you have some that require skills to use, because your rogue is good at skills and they can use these better than most of the rest of the party will. It could be as simple as a ledge that needs an athletics check to climb, or as complicated as a mechanism that needs a Thieves Tools check to disarm, and if you do, a trap goes off, damaging a large part of the battlefield. When you combine things that need both the rogue's mobility and their high skill modifiers, you can really tailor encounters to your rogue and let them be the linchpin that just destroys the entire encounter. By building encounters that reward mobility and give your rogue the opportunity to use their skills, you'll break up the monotony of just sneak attacking every turn and give them interesting things to do. Also, just as a quick general note, make sure you're putting cover in your encounters, otherwise your rogue has nothing to hide behind. Not every rogue is going to want to hide in combat, but a lot do, and it's a very useful tool for them. When planning for ways to let your rogue shine out of combat, there's two abilities that every rogue get that are really easy to plan around. And the first is Thieves Tools, and these are really easy to work in. If there's a locked door or a trap that you can easily disarm with Thieves Tools, that's your rogue's job. And these aren't super interesting encounters, but there's just a good way to reinforce that the rogue is useful and give them a way to just show off their skills. Another ability that rogues have access to is Thieves Cant, which is a language comprised of symbols and slang that lets rogues covertly communicate with each other. Unfortunately, a lot of DMs ignore this ability and don't use it, but it's a really easy way to feed your rogue information. I encourage you to look up Hobo Signs. Those were basically symbols that people would place on buildings like in the early 1900s that would just indicate something about the person that lived there. It could be this person gives out food, this person has a lot of money, things like that. Simple symbols like that on buildings will give your rogue information without any effort on your part. If you want a more complicated implementation of Thieves Cant using the slang aspect, I've linked a video in the description that talks about that in a lot of depth. In addition, when your rogue is using their skills that they have expertise in, think less about if it's realistic or plausible, and more if it's something that a character like Batman or a character like Sherlock Holmes would be able to accomplish. With expertise, your rogue is very likely one of the best people in the world at that skill, and they should get to feel like that and use that really high modifier to do really cool, interesting things. A final thing to note about rogues is that they are much less reliant on rests than the other classes are. While most classes have abilities that come back on a short or a long rest, pretty much everything a rogue gets just works all day. Because of this, your rogue is probably going to be as strong at the start of the adventuring day as they are at the end, with the exception of hit points. This also means that when planning rests, you don't really need to plan them around the rogue, so keep that in mind. And with that, you should have a good understanding of how the rogue class works, as well as things you can do as the DM to make the game just a little bit better for them. If you have any questions, or if you have suggestions for what class I should cover next, please leave a comment. Otherwise, thanks for stopping by the Arcanum, and have a good day.